Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Liv or Olivia if you have not been here before, but today we are going to be talking about a ton of books that I am going to be recommending you guys. I've seen this video idea going around for quite some time now on booktube, but to be honest, I've never done it because I wasn't sure if I would get enough questions or just enough recommendations that you guys would want from me. I didn't know if anyone would actually be interested, but when I say you guys pulled through, you pulled through. There was about 40, I think, YouTube comments and 100 or so Instagram DMs. So needless to say, I will be doing this again because I am not going to get to every single recommendation in this video, but I had so much fun picking and choosing different recommendations from books that I have personally read. A couple I haven't read quite yet, but they're high on my TBR. So I am really excited to just jump right into this, and thank you guys once again for dropping your recommendations, and hopefully you will pick up some of these. The first specific recommendation that a couple people actually asked is a book with mermaids in it. This is probably going to be one more for horror lovers. This is not like cutesy mermaids, but I have heard very amazing things about this one. So it has more sirens and horror vibes to it, so it's not going to be as popular of a book, but I wanted to recommend Into the Drowning Deep by Myra Grant, which is also Seanan McGuire. This is one that has been on my list to read every fall season. I believe there is a sunken ship, there is a tragedy, I think there is a sister dynamic as well in this one. It's been a while since I've read the synopsis, but if you're into killer mermaids, I feel like this could be a very good option. The next recommendation I wanted to talk about is an underrated book, and I actually have quite a few for this, but I'm only going to mention two, and the first one is A Million Junes by Emily Henry. The reason I'm bringing this one up is because a lot of people know that Emily Henry writes romance books, specifically adult romance books, but somehow people aren't aware that she used to write young adult kind of magical realism. So because I love Emily Henry so much, and I actually read this before all her romance books came out and before I was even like a romance reader, I was obsessed with this book. I loved it, and it's also perfect for springtime. I'm not going to say too much about it, but there is two families that have this history of drama between them, and so the son and the daughter end up becoming friends even though they're not really supposed to, so it has a little bit of forbidden love. But if you've never read anything by Emily Henry besides her adult romance, I would definitely give this one a shot. The writing is obviously super amazing, and I need to reread this one sometime soon. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. Both of these ladies are very popular authors, but I believe their backlist does not get the love it deserves. This one is so atmospheric, it's creepy, it kind of gives me The Village vibes if you're into that. Her writing is just so good without even trying. It's so effortlessly atmospheric. I love the friendship dynamic in this one that may or may not turn into a romance. I love the mystery that's involved, the small town feels. It's just such a good book, and I personally cannot believe this is a debut, but I had to recommend these two because they are very loved authors in the community, but definitely do not get as much hype as they deserve. A couple people were asking for a clean romance recommendation, and I just had to mention an author as a whole because I love all of her books, and that is Courtney Walsh. The only physical book I own of hers is Across Country Christmas, but she recently wrote My Phony Valentine, which you do not have to read on Valentine's Day. Her romance is so good. The tension is amazing, and it's clean, and it's a sweet, wholesome story every single time, and I cannot recommend her enough. Next, we have one of my absolute favorite recommendations that was asked for this video is books that give pirates or Pirates of the Caribbean vibes, and I used to be obsessed with that movie franchise. Honestly, I still am. We love a good Johnny Depp moment. I have two recommendations for this, and the first one is definitely pirates, but the second one has a little bit more kind of creepy seaside vibes, I guess you could say, but the first one is All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. This one has been on my shelves since the beginning of time, but I do know our main character actually strikes up a deal with a king or a prince to team up with a pirate to help her find stolen magic. So it's fantasy, but it's also pirates. It sounds like perfection, and I have a feeling I'm really gonna like this one, so I'm hoping to finally read it this summer, but hopefully that piques your interest as far as the pirates go. And I also had to recommend House of Salt and Sorrows, which is another book and another author that I absolutely adore. This book is so creepy, and it's set right near the coast. Usually in Pirates of the Caribbean there are high stakes adventure, and while this one isn't quite adventurous, it's definitely high stakes because there's a mysterious plague going around. But I feel like people that love Pirates of the Caribbean are immediately going to love books that are set on the coast or that have water involved, so I feel like this could be a really good option. The next recommendation was a favorite backlist title, and I do have a thriller but also a series I wanted to talk about, and the first book is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. Honestly, anything by this author is amazing if you are into thrillers, specifically creepy thrillers that always have a good moral or story or meaning at the end of them. Jennifer McMahon still holds the #1 place as my favorite thriller author, and it's gonna take a lot for that to change, so I will mention her at any chance I can get. And another series that I could not put down is the Scythe Trilogy by Neil Shusterman. I am not joking when I say this is an unputdownable series. Every single chapter was a cliffhanger. In this story we have Citra and Rowan, who are hired as apprentices to basically learn how to kill people to keep the population level down, and they are doing it completely against their will. They didn't sign up for anything like this, and it's just a very interesting story but also an interesting commentary, so I highly recommend this series, but just know that you're going to want to have the other two on hand because I could not stop reading this. The next recommendation I was asked about is a fantasy for beginners, so of course I'm going to recommend something that's a standalone and not this massive series. So I could not find my copy of Sorcery of Thorns, but this is an amazing book to start with. This book itself is just like an ode or a nod to bookworms or readers in general, and that's what I really love about it. But the magical system is not difficult to understand. There's not any crazy politics. There's a little bit of romance, of course, but it's just one that I feel like is easy to understand, and it's not a big series, and it still is one of my favorites of all time. But if you are wanting to dive into a fantasy series, highly recommend Throne of Glass. I myself am not finished with this series, but I can say so far that it is very good. I think it's very important for a beginner that's getting into fantasy for the book to be very easy to understand, and this one is definitely very easy to comprehend. It's basically just about a girl who is hired to train as the king's assassin and do jobs for him. So this book is a little bit slower. It's not as high stakes, so it's not going to be super political. We're just building up that character development. I just think this would be great for anyone that's just starting out. Next we have cozy vibes but save the business kind of storyline, and for this one I had to recommend Legends and Lattes. I don't know if the person that asked for this recommendation is a fantasy reader, but this one is also kind of good for beginner fantasy readers because it's not anything super crazy or difficult to understand. It's basically about Viv, who is this orc who decides to put down the sword, stop fighting, and just go to a different seaside coastal town, set up a new coffee shop, and teach the people there what coffee actually is. So there is a point where the coffee shop isn't doing too well, but of course they're trying to save the shop, and it's just so full of cozy vibes. I I cannot recommend this enough. The characters themselves are just like a warm hug, and of course you have coffee shop vibes, you have a mouse that bakes, and it's just so cute. So highly recommend this, especially for the cozy vibes. Next we have a fantasy with the found family trope, and I had to talk about The House in the Cerulean Sea because this story is so sweet. It's about an orphanage, and of course there's that found family there, but there's a man that goes and has to stay there, has to check up on the orphanage to see if it's okay to stay in business or how these kids are doing. I don't want to spoil anything, but the way he gets connected to these very interesting kids is so heartfelt and so sweet. There's definitely huge found family trope vibes in this, and I need to reread it because it's been so long. But TJ Klune, I think, almost always has like a found family trope in his stories, so that's what I really love about the way he writes. The next recommendation is a romance with spice, but not too much spice. I love that question, but the first one that you guys know if you've been around here for a while that I had to recommend is any Abby Jimenez book, and the one that I always recommend starting with is Part of Your World. She actually has series, 2 separate romance series, so I would definitely make sure you don't read the backs of like the second books or you might spoil yourselves, but this is like the perfect one to start with. It's so cute. It's such a wholesome story. This is one of my all-time favorite romances, and her books typically have a little spice, but definitely not too much, or typically it's near the end, and I'm not a huge spice reader either, and this is just the perfect amount for me. But I also wanted to talk about Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren because I adore this one. This one is childhood friends to lovers, and it's also really great for bookish people like us because there's words involved, there's letters involved. But I also had to recommend another one of my all-time faves, which is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I love anything that this woman writes. She is so funny, she's so incredibly talented, but this book had a much deeper meaning. It explored grief, it explored just all sorts of different mental health things as well. This one is like near and dear to my heart. I cannot wait for her new book. So all 3 of these and all of 3 of these authors in general, I would definitely look into as recommendations because they're some of my all-time favorites. The next one I have, which I also adore so much, is a cozy fantasy to read in summer while sitting in my garden sipping coffee. And this could go 2 different directions. It could go a coffee direction or it could go a garden direction. So I also wanted to recommend Legends and Lattes as a cozy fantasy because there's coffee involved in this one and it is a lighter fantasy. So if you're feeling the coffee vibes, I would definitely pick this one up. Or I would also recommend Daisies for Innocence, which is a spring cozy mystery that is high up on my personal TBR, and it's about an enchanted garden where there is a perfume shop and it draws in people with its fragrant flowers and lush greenery. But then there's also a murder involved, of course, and a little Welsh corgi. I definitely feel like you could go both directions with this one, whether you're wanting a full-out cozy fantasy or if you're wanting a more magical cozy mystery. So these would probably be my top 2 recommendations. The next recommendation I have is one for a standalone fantasy, specifically magical realism, and I will use any opportunity I can to talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This one is more urban fantasy, but there's also a historical timeline because our main character has lived for decades. That is part of the story, but it doesn't feel like you're reading a historical novel, if that makes sense. Our main character, Addie, is cursed to not be remembered by everyone that she meets, which is a very lonely life, but then she ends up kind of striking a deal with, I guess you could say, the devil, so that is where kind of the fantasy elements come in. I think this is one of the #1 books that I just absolutely sobbed over for hours, even the next day. So if you're wanting a more emotional, I guess, magical realism, you could give this one a shot. This one was kind of tough for me to pinpoint because I don't read a lot of magical realism, but I do highly recommend this one. The next book I have is one for getting you out of a reading slump, and I had to recommend No Exit. I feel like any thriller could easily get you out of a reading slump because most mystery thrillers are page turners, and this one had my heart pounding and my adrenaline running for the entire time I read this. It was just insane. It's also a little bit gory, so be prepared for that. This is about a college student named Darby who is driving through a terrible snowstorm to go see her mom, which I believe is on her deathbed. And unfortunately, the storm gets so bad that she has to stop at a rest stop or an exit, but she ends up finding a little girl locked in the back of a van, and there's also a lot of interesting people that are very suspicious at this rest stop. Not only do you have this crazy scary snowstorm, but Darby's put in this situation of she doesn't know who to trust. She wants to save this little girl. Crazy things just kept happening one after another, and I could not put this down. So I highly recommend this one, especially if you're in a reading slump. There's a lot of other mystery thrillers out there, but I mean, I was up until like 3 a.m. finishing this. I don't think anyone would be able to put this one down. The next book is one that has magic but also baking vibes, and I had to talk about A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. This is one that I started and didn't quite make it through during the winter time, but this is the perfect cozy vibe. It almost reads like a middle grade because our main character is a little bit younger, and she has this ability to somehow make the things she bakes come to life. I guess she's considered like a kitchen witch in a way, and this was just so adorable from what I read already, especially because the sourdough starter or the sourdough guy has like his own personality, and it's just so cute and so good. There's also like a mystery involved. I feel like this is just the perfect option if you're looking for baking vibes. The next book recommendation is one where the house is a character itself. And this one was really hard, but one book specifically came to mind that I read the end of last year is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is about a girl whose dad used to be a serial killer. Her mom isn't doing so well health-wise, if I'm remembering correctly, and so she moves back home to this house to be with her mom. A lot of wild things start happening, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. This one especially made me think of the house as an actual character. Next, we have the book with the most shocking plot twist, and I would probably have to say The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This is one that I read forever ago, but I don't own a copy to. But this is a book that I have not stopped thinking about until this day because the plot twist was just so good. This is one of those books where you feel like you have everything figured out in this nice, neat package near the end, but then you read the epilogue and your mind is absolutely blown. So I highly recommend checking this one out. I feel like it's not one that anyone or a lot of people have been able to predict. Definitely check this one out, and I am due for a reread very soon. The next book is one that will absolutely make you sob, and the first book that I ever have any recollection of sobbing at was the last Harry Potter book. But besides that, I did want to mention The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Her books are just very emotional reads, and the thing that happens in this book completely caught me off guard. The family dynamic in this, especially with the sisters, just made this book so phenomenal and so emotional. So if you're looking for a good cry, I definitely recommend this one. But if you are not huge into historical, I did want to recommend 2 romances that are very different from each other. Is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid, but also Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. Any Abby Jimenez I feel like are very deep emotional books, and I feel like this is just hard to recommend people books that make you cry because not everyone is gonna have the same reaction, but this one comes after Part of Your World, and I recently read it, still cannot get over it to this day. But also Taylor Jenkins Reid just knows how to write such good characters, and I was so invested and connected to the relationship that happened in this one. So between the Nightingale and these two kind of very different romances, I feel like hopefully maybe one will make you cry. Next, we have a friendship focused book, and I feel like there could have been a lot for this one as well, but the most recent book that stood out to me is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. And while this looks like a really creepy, scary horror book, which it kind of is, but I personally don't read horror or don't read it very much at all, and I still had a huge connection and investment in Abby and Gretchen in this story because they would go to any lengths and do anything for each other, and the friendship, especially at the end, the way this book ends, it's just an example of how true friendship should be, where you fight through anything together, you get through anything together, you support each other, you believe each other, and I just could not get enough of this friendship. So even if you don't like horror, I feel like you could possibly get into this one, but this is just one of my recent favorites. The next recommendation is a male character that is a troubled genius, and I have no clue where my copy of this book is, so I'm just gonna hold up the second book in this series, that is Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Kaz Brekker is one of my all-time favorite male main characters. The background of trauma to his story, but also how smart he is in these books is just insane, and how he outwits all of his enemies. He is my most favorite male character of all time, and I just feel like he doesn't always get the attention he deserves. He's also just very mysterious, and you kind of slowly unravel the story, and I don't know, there's something about the way he was written that I think is just so good. So if you are looking for someone that is super smart but also witty, and he has a very troubled background, it would definitely be Kaz Brekker and the Six of Crows duology. The next recommendation is a book with Finley Donovan vibes, and I believe this one is actually a series. The first one is called Grave Reservations by Cherie Priest. This is one I have been wanting to get to for a while now. This is about a girl named Lita Foley who definitely has psychic abilities, and she helps people solve cases with her abilities, but it's also very comical, and she gets stuck in like crazy situations that turn out to be really funny. I feel like this cover also just kind of gives off Finley vibes with like the sunglasses, the female on the front, and I feel like this is definitely gonna have similar vibes, so I cannot wait to read this one myself. And then we have some middle grade books, and I probably could have gone crazy with this recommendation, but I tried to keep it to my top recommendation I always talk about is the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. If you are a fan of Alice in Wonderland, Harry Potter, I definitely recommend this series. This is about Morgan, who is cursed, and her town curses her for every terrible thing that happens, but one day a man named Jupiter sweeps her up, takes her to another town where she has to kind of prove herself in this competition that she can be willing to stay and earn her keep in this magical town. And there's just all these different hijinks and adventures that they get up to. This is just such a fun story, but one that I feel like all ages can definitely get something from, but also really enjoy. And last but not least, we have a book so unputdownable it'll make you read late into the night and forget about all your responsibilities. And this was just bringing me back to all the books I remember reading within 24 hours or less. And the first one that comes to mind is Hidden Pictures. This one is a creepy mystery thriller about a girl who ends up nannying for this family, and the little boy does some very sinister things, including drawing very creepy pictures that turn out to be kind of cartoony, but then they end up getting very, very, very creepy. And I feel like the pictures in this book just keep you reading because you want to know like the next thing that's gonna happen and how these pictures are gonna look, you kind of start piecing them all together and realizing what's happening. But also the end of this was just so insane. I don't think I could have ever predicted what was gonna happen at the end of this. Because of the pictures, I feel like this just added a very unique element that I hadn't seen in any other thrillers before, and because of that, I feel like I just could not put it down. Well, that is it, friends. Thank you so much for sending in so many amazing questions and recommendations you wanted, because this was so much fun. A little bit more out of the ordinary for me in regards to content, but I had the best time coming up with some recommendations. Let me know if you guys have read the recommendations that I suggested. I will definitely be doing this again because you all had so many great recommendations I could have talked about, but this video probably would have been like 2 hours long if I had done all of them. But before you go, don't forget to like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you're new here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you so much. I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video.